welcome back. It's episode 4. I have my iced tea ready to go. Are you ready for another episode? Whew. It's been a challenging week. We got an eastern snowstorm and the cold lasted for 3 additional days, and it definitely had an impact on the birds. And I guess we maybe kind of use that as an opportunity to talk about spring, and specifically talk about how things like this impact the birds. I'm not an ornithologist, and I do not claim to be an expert on all manner of things, but I do a fairly decent job, I believe, of observing the world around me. And that's, I think, a great opportunity. I think right now, when things like that happen, it's a great time to think about what you usually observe and think of what you are observing, and to figure out where they're different. And as you do that, you start to get an idea of how birds react to the elements, how they react to change, how they react to stressors such as weather, wind conditions, what have you. And it might give you a better idea on how to approach birding various locations and situations. In fact, one of the topics today, brought up by a message I got from Lisa Rolfe, is going to be around maximizing bird lists in locations that you go to. And part of maximizing bird lists is understanding what you're about to get into, what to expect, and when all of it is happening in it. So it should be an interesting topic. I don't think I can possibly cover every facet and every avenue of it. I definitely encourage others that have thoughts, ideas, whatever they might be, to reach out to me, put comments on this video on YouTube, or send me email, whatever it might be, and provide some of that stuff, because that can help feed into future episodes, and we can talk about those and we say, oh yeah, I totally forgot about that. That's a great idea on it. But when we talk about observations, I think a great place to start is a bird I've referenced on multiple episodes now. I'm considering my yard avatar bird of the year, and that's the eastern meadowlark. So eastern meadowlark is a fairly early spring migrant, but it is a migrant. The vast majority, 99.9% of meadowlarks, they head south. Now, they don't go extremely far south. That's why they can be an early spring migrant, because they don't have that far to go to come back. But they definitely go to warmer climate whenever they can. Some of them do overwinter, but it's an extremely small number, and it's not typically, say, around the Twin Cities area where I'm located. So when that bird came in and started singing, I had it for 18 straight days. We had a really good run of weather. It was really decent out, even if it was kind of chilly, but the birds hadn't been stressed very much. Then we got our Easter snowstorm, and I had mentioned it last week while I was recording episode. I had peeked the patio door open 4 times during the day, did not hear the bird. A couple of other times I did the same. I thought about going out for a walk. I never heard the bird. So my 18-day streak ended on Easter. Ironically, another segment we'll talk about at the end relating to day listing or listing in general. It was the one day of the month in April that I had never recorded eastern meadowlarks, so that one lives for another year. Kind of a bummer, and we'll talk about listing much later in the episode on it. Now, beyond the eastern meadowlark, or at least beyond that first day, I was out every day thereafter doing a walk in the neighborhood. Part of my new normal: get up just before 6 a.m., get myself ready, gear up, and then go out for a neighborhood walk and just observe the world and just kind of find that new norm. So get about 2 miles in the morning and put a bird list up. I did not record that eastern meadowlark for 3 days in a row then. On the 4th day, I did record it, but it was from my home office where I'm standing now, looking out the window across the field. I never heard the bird. It didn't actually sing that day either. So a 4-day stretch for that eastern meadowlark that had sung constantly 18 straight days. And we're not talking about a pair of birds. I've only seen one bird out there. There has been another eastern meadowlark at the edge of the neighborhood in another weedy lot, but there have not been 2 around. So we're not talking about it just happened to also get into nesting or whatever and shut down singing. So That snowstorm had a 4-day impact, the day of plus 3 days after. And part of that, I believe, is because it was so cold the resultant days. There was a day that we never got above 32 degrees the entire day. And one of the mornings I woke up, it was 17 degrees out. So an early spring migrant that typically desires to not be here during the winter got a taste of winter. And that snow hung around, and it probably stressed that bird. It probably put that bird in a position of having to prioritize calories over singing, defending a territory, and trying to attract a mate. And so it just shut down. I started, though, to also think about the other birds. What wasn't showing up on my list that I expected to be on my list? And now some of this comes down to your experience with an area, but if you're doing it every single day, you can get an idea of that. You can get a feel for the cadence of it. And it started, it was kind of fascinating to look deeper into it and realize that I had seen or heard the beginnings of savanna sparrows being on territory, and then they went silent. 3 days, I got nothing from them either. That 4th day in the morning, I got my first song out of a savanna sparrow in several days. And this morning, again, I had savanna sparrow out singing. In fact, vesper sparrow was singing as well this morning in the neighborhood. And as I went through that walk, I started to think about more and other birds. And this even applies to the most common species. As I got back, there's a little business park that has a creek running through it, and they put an aggregate trail in there for individuals that are working in that area, but it's right on the edge of my neighborhood. So I can walk through there. I'm almost always the only person back in there, and I know the 2 spots where I expect to see or hear black-capped chickadee. Every single morning, with the exception of Easter, because I didn't go for a hike or a walk on Easter, black-capped chickadee was singing in the morning. So black-capped chickadee, not impacted at all. In fact, black-capped chickadee are one of the best food finders out there as far as the small songbirds go, and it was almost like they were not impacted one iota. I saw a change a little bit in the behavior of, say, the red-winged blackbirds, which are also a migrant, but not as much. They can eat a lot of seed. They're not, looking for, an insectivore-based, insect-based diet or anything of that sort or whatever. So they were singing on territory, not nearly as much, but I saw a lot of activity out of them. So they were moving into the neighborhood and out back to the edges and everything towards the retention ponds, very active. American robins almost didn't even stop singing. There's maybe a slight change in behavior that I was able to observe. But by and large, as you look at birds that are more resident species that can handle winter weather, they're well adept and equipped for it, they barely change their habits. And then these other early spring migrants, they change their habits a lot. We had some pretty early tree swallows that showed up in the yard just after the bluebirds showed up. We have a house for each available, and honestly, the tree swallows have been more regular than the bluebirds at this point, and I was worried about the tree swallows, and we still got a pretty regular set of visits from them. And that actually drove me to look up a little bit, and I just did some Google searches and a few other things to say, well, how low of a temperature can tree swallows handle? I didn't find a ton of information, but I did find that they will switch their diets to non-insect based diets depending on the weather. So they are the earliest of the swallow family to come back to Minnesota, which it then makes sense that they're more capable of handling some of these cold snaps. And maybe it just depends on what's the snowpack like, what's the level of impact or whatever that they have. But I'm happy to see that they're flying around. I can see them literally out there right this moment, kind of defending territory on one or both of the houses. So it'll be interesting when the bluebirds finally come back in. I did see them the other day as well on it. So just something I wanted to talk about right from the beginning. Just an interesting idea as you go out and you do bird watching. Maybe you're doing a daily routine, whatever it might be, whatever your new normal is. Think about some of these factors. Think about when the weather changes, when the wind changes. The wind especially. Go out birding when it's 15 mile per hour winds. It may not be the most awesome experience, but think about what you hear and what you don't hear. Which bird stops singing when it gets really windy out? Do the goldfinches still sing? Does the eastern meadowlark still sing? Whatever your neighborhood birds might be, do they shut down when the wind is up? And again, all of that informs your knowledge base around each species and helps guide you in the future if you really kind of tune into those factors and say, what am I hearing? What am I not hearing? When am I seeing something? When am I not? Adding those elements and pieces into your bird watching can really add a depth to your knowledge that you might not necessarily have thought about before on it. So we've got all kinds of good stuff to talk about. We're going to talk about some eBird yard stuff really quickly, but I think it's an important topic that came up. A friend reached out to me, and I thought it was a really important thing to mention, so we'll jump into that first. And hope you enjoyed the episode. Thanks for coming back, and appreciate all the comments. All right, welcome back. You can see a nice male eastern bluebird looking a little bit grumpy, hanging out on one of our shepherd's hooks. Their house is right next to that we set out for them. This was the first bluebird of the year to come back to the yard. Hopefully it's the same couple as the previous year. My wife and I do enjoy naming them. We call these two that have visited a couple of years now, Jake and Amy. That's using a Brooklyn Nine-Nine, a couple of characters that are now married on that particular comedy show. So hopefully other people name their yard birds as well. We have several pairs of birds that we name. We have a Bob and Linda that are mourning doves. Those are from cartoon Bob's Burgers. So yeah, all kinds of fun stuff like that. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was relating to eBird yard lists. We've talked about this before. I'm not going to go into those depths, but what I do want to talk about is the location of stuff. So I wanted to at least illustrate this because this does point out, I wouldn't say a flaw, but just certainly something. So we've gone into this stuff before. I'm going to a species. So I'm going to go to an eastern meadowlark. All right, and on eastern meadowlark, we're going to go show point sooner as we look at this, and we're going to just dive right in here. We're going to go into Washington County right here. So these 2 points in the center screen, 2 little orange points, is my house and my neighborhood. So these are personal spots, but this is the eBird website, and all I did was search for eastern meadowlark. Additionally, if I put a rare bird in, because that rare bird showed up in my yard, it will show up in other places. People will get emailed by that. Now, for me, this isn't a problem. I don't have too much of a concern about it, but there is a reality out there, and the reality is that some people don't want the world at large, or the birding world at large, to know exactly, precisely, specifically where they live, unless they happen to be a birding friend. So when I click on this, you can see that Ben Douglas has listed an inordinate number of days in a row an eastern meadowlark from his home. So you could certainly derive that, well, he's doing that because he's got this big open space across the street. Now, that point is literally on my house. If you are uncomfortable with that and you would like to use the eBird feature, then you probably do not want your house to be exactly pinpointed where it's located. And if you've already done that and you didn't realize it, now I'm pointing this out and you're like, oh great, now I have something else to worry about. Relax, we can change that. So let's go to My eBird. I'm going to click on My eBird here, and over on the right-hand column of options, I'm going to zoom this in just so that we can all find it. Below this Donate Now button, My checklist. So down in My checklist is an option called Manage My Location. So I'm going to click on that. This is literally a collection of every location you have ever listed from using eBird. Mine has 3,700 locations, and that is a lot because I have birded in all 87 counties, and even last year I birded in all 87 counties multiple times in the year because I'm pathological and I have a problem. Now, if you want to find your home location, you just have to type that in. So I need to go to Lake Elmo, and I've named it Lake Elmo Home. We can see it there. We'll just narrow this so that there's one. All right, so this is the edit location menu or screen or option set or whatever. So from this location, you can do some other stuff, but what we're interested in is not renaming it. You could rename it, but we're looking to move it. So when I clicked on move, it now says click on the map or use the search bar to update coordinates. So we are literally going to move that green point somewhere else. Now, if you stay within a certain distance, a mile or less, you're still providing a level of granularity to eBird, the organization, to researchers, that is going to give viable information. You're not going to destroy data by technically putting it a little bit further away from it. So what I could do is I could move this to the corner of Inwood and 10th, or I could move it to the end of 5th Street, either of which would still be in a pretty close range to my house. So what I'm going to do is put it right at the intersection of Inwood and 5th and just say, my home location is around here. And now that I've selected that location, I can click the move button, which is just above the map on the right. Click that. All right, location has been moved. So let's validate that. Let's go right back where we were before. I went to Explore, go back to Species. Let's go to Eastern Meadowlark. While we're at it, let's just do current year. Point sooner. Zoom in right to where we need to be. And what used to be located to the east is now over here. My Lake Elmo home location now shows there. Now this other location is Inwood neighborhood, and now that's at the parking lot of the main office for the neighborhood as far as sales office goes, because they're still building homes in this neighborhood. Now eventually that's going to be someone else's home, so I probably shouldn't put my neighborhood location there. So what I could do is I could center it on the neighborhood. I could put it, say, in this retention pond out here, and I'll zoom back out because that creates an old view. Or I could just put it in the middle of this field, or I could put it, this corner over here is going to be a park. It keeps doing that. Let's stop doing that. So I could just move that location as well. And all that's going to do is just give me a little bit of protection, just from the standpoint of, if you don't want, a number of birders, coming in directly to your yard location because you had a rarity come up, and you'd rather control that a bit more by saying, okay, we're not welcoming people to the yard right now, or we are, but here's the circumstances. If this is just out on eBird, it's a little bit harder for you to control that mechanism and to gain some comfort back. So if that's something you're looking for, use those procedures, move that location. Don't do it an inordinate distance away. You do want a little bit of a stickiness to your home location so that the data has greater value to it on there, but you don't have to have such an ultra granular location that it literally points to your exact yard, because from a research standpoint, there's very few circumstances where that's going to matter on it. But definitely something I wanted to point out. It's important for individuals to have that control. Yes, you can do other things inside of eBird, like hide your data. You can hide specific checklists and stuff, but if you eBird yard birds every single day, it'd be much easier if you could just select a location and know that it doesn't exactly pinpoint where you are, but you can still get that data in there, and you can enjoy the features of eBird around yard listing without having too many concerns out there. So appreciate that birding friend that pointed that out. And as it came up, just a great opportunity to talk about. So we'll move on to rare. All right, it is time to talk about what rarities have shown up in the last week. And I will diverge probably pretty quickly from just that core topic. There's not a ton to look at in there. But I think it brings up a really interesting topic, and something I wanted to talk about in a little bit more depth, just to kind of plant the seed for any individuals that don't, kind of realize rarity in certain circumstances and situations. Most of this segment has been, and probably will continue to be, focused on rare birds that are rare almost anywhere. So like, it's not a regular bird in the state, but it's rare almost everywhere that you go. Prior episode, we talked about a Eurasian widgeon that was found up near Detroit Lakes in Hamden Slough, I believe it was. I think that was Bo Schroyer's find. We did get another Eurasian widgeon this week. This showed up at Pelican Lake in Wright County. Wright County, just northwest of Hennepin County. Hennepin County is one of the most birded counties due to population and density of birders in the entire state. And for some reason, Wright County gets absolutely no love. It is a phenomenal county. There's a lot of good stuff up in Wright County, but for some reason, I don't know, it's maybe just, it's so big, there's so much space to cover, it's hard to really get to know all of those spaces. And additionally, you have Sherburne County just to the north, and that has Sherburne National Wildlife Refuge. That's a huge draw. So it's just, I think it just suffers from proximity to a bunch of other spaces. But back to this widgeon here on Pelican Lake. This Pelican Lake area is quite fascinating. There's a lot of different parking spaces out there. So when a bird, a rarity, shows up, it is important to understand where it's being sighted from, because you can be on the opposite side of this, on the east side, and something can be on the west side, and it can be a real challenge to actually get the bird. If we just use the hotspot here and pop that up, we can see that the Eurasian widgeon has been seen by a lot of individuals, and then you can see a lot of individual markers here. So it's probably this public access on this side where it actually was. Hard to tell for certain because there are also locations all around this lake out there. I apologize, I'm not 100% certain who the original finder on this particular bird was. I saw it crop up because I'm friends with Tony Lau, who lives in Wright County, and I didn't quite catch who the original finder of that was. So if you happen to be that finder and you're watching this video, please comment and just say, hey, yeah, I found that bird, it was super cool. Eurasian widgeon is a lovely bird, excellent bird for the county and the area, so really neat. A lot of people went after that bird. This is probably a great opportunity. I noticed in the MOU listserv, so that's the email service that the MOU has hosted for many years. Paul Buddy put out an email on that relating to COVID and birding. And it was mostly an encouragement for individuals to continue to be safe and to think about, you know, your rare bird chases and opportunities, and realizing there will be other people at those locations, and to make sure that you're being safe. So, you know, you might run into friends, you might run into, you know, new friends you've never met before. And it's important to continue to maintain that social distance space. There's a lot of information out there about transmission distance and all of that kind of stuff. So it's really hard to say, you know, when we put ourselves at risk and when we don't. Making no judgments myself, I'm not chasing very many birds right now. I did go after the eared grebe I mentioned last week because that was within 5 miles of my house. But I haven't chased any other birds, and that's just a personal preference. I don't feel, I'm risk averse as an individual. I've worked for insurance companies my entire life, literally since I left college, or actually before I left college. I've worked for 2 different major insurance companies, and I just have the tendency to mitigate my risk in a different way. And one of those during this time for me is not chasing rare birds, but I'm not going to sit here and say don't chase rare birds. I do want you to be aware of things you can do to be safe. I think it's important to think about, did I get gas in my home area? And do I need to get gas while I'm out? Just to minimize your contact with other communities, facilities, and locations. So, you know, I would personally prefer to reserve gas stations out of town for other individuals that's in town for them. So if you have to make a chase and you decide that that's something you want to do, just, you know, think about food. Do I have food and snacks with me? Am I going to need to utilize a gas station? Can I do most of that before I leave town? You know, birders are in an odd position because we're encouraged so often to make our presence known in communities so that when we're bird watching, it's understood that birders are coming in and spending money in these places, but this is not the time for that. This is a time to do the best you can to isolate yourself from others and from their communities so that you minimize transmission vectors. You know, one is picking it up and one is delivering it on there. So just be aware of those kinds of things as we talk about these rare birds. Not everything has to be chased, and the next bird that we're going to talk about is a great example of that, I think. Let's talk about Say's phoebe. An outstanding find is a Say's phoebe down here Some of you might recognize this if you've been watching these episodes. I'm going to keep zooming in, and here's a landfill and a space. And this is 140th Street. This is the same spot, if you'll remember, Matthew Thompson found a California gull recently. I did not chase that California gull. I have no regrets. I have never seen a California gull. Definitely not in the state of Minnesota. I've missed a couple of opportunities in the past, but I did not chase this particular bird for reasons we previously just mentioned. And now there's a Say's Phoebe in this location. And I am also not chasing this particular bird. I am not admonishing anyone that does. I hope individuals are enjoying the bird and adding that to their life list or their Dakota County list. In there, another excellent find. I think it was Mr. Schmid that found this particular bird. I don't know if he's an eBird. I don't know if his specific record is in here. No, I do not see it on there. Excellent find. Great eyes. I guess the bird's been hanging out toward the back side of this main pool on the north side of the road. As you can see, when I zoomed in tight enough here, this doesn't even look like there's any water in this particular location. This 140th Street, in the 6 or 7 years that I have been aware of it, has fluctuated very heavily. In fact, on the south side of 140th Street, this particular location was completely dry by the time I started going to this spot. In fact, the yellow-headed blackbirds that had nested here annually were almost completely pushed out of it because there was no water left. But we've had a couple of really good years, really good water years, good being an operative word because some people have gotten flooded out and that's not a good thing. But it has refilled wetlands, and I have noticed several wetlands that I visit near my home are overfilled and have been now for a couple of years. So this 140th Street's really come back alive. And as you can tell, California gull found here. I think there was an Iceland gull here at the same time. And really good birds keep showing up in this space. In fact, I just read this morning that there's a Hudsonian godwit hanging out there this morning. Past birds are absolutely insane at this location. So at your discretion, at your leisure, if you're able to make this trip and able to take a look at this location, it is good most of the year. When you talk about early spring migration and you talk about into the fall, this location can be absolutely insane. It is just off the river. We can see Spring Lake and the Mississippi River there. And this location at a bend in the river seems to dump a lot of really good birds in there. So another outstanding find for a rarity that's rare pretty much anywhere. I got to see my first state Say's Phoebe last year and the year before over on the western edge of the state. They'd been discovered in an abandoned homestead and actually were nesting inside the house. So I was able to get pictures of the bird. I don't know if I can dig those up or not. Maybe I'll try and pull those in for the video somewhere in here. But they were nesting inside the house. Get pictures of them right on the entry door that had the front glass knocked out of it. So I've seen Say's Phoebe before. It would be a great bird to add to my Dakota list. I'm just choosing not to at this particular time to make that particular chase on there. But if you're able to and you're able to do so safely, then good for you. I don't know what its status is today, which I believe is the 18th, but I know the bird had been seen all the way up through the 17th. So definitely a few days worth for that particular bird. Actually, let's take a look. Yeah, I don't see anything yet today. It is the 18th. We can see Carl Eisley's report on the 17th. So nothing yet today has come up on this particular bird in there. That's pretty much all the rarities that I really wanted to talk about, but I did want to jump into another subject. I got a nice email from Thomas Haas, who lives in Texas and is a former Anoka County resident, so still pays attention to the MOU listserv, and probably that's how he picked up my video feed. And I had referenced a white-winged dove, I believe it was up in Polk County, that had been found. And he made kind of a humorous comment about nearly falling out of his chair when I talked about it being a rare bird and a rare find in the area. And he shared some information about the proliferation of white-winged dove out of, I think he said, the Rio Grande Valley, and how it's begun in certain areas, especially around his neighborhood in Texas, to push out mourning doves. as a primary nester, and he's seen a reduction in Aztec doves in his yard location. And we've seen something similar ourselves, because the last 20, 25 years or so, we've seen a really great proliferation of Eurasian collared doves across the United States, and they have crept into Minnesota. In fact, in last year's kind of statewide county tick effort that I put up, it was really easy to pick up Eurasian collared doves in the kind of southwestern, western portion of the state. All you'd have to do is drive through cornfields, find a town, relatively small town, and then just drive into the center of it and either get out of the car and listen, roll the window down, or just look for something on the power lines or near a grain elevator, and you're probably going to find Eurasian collared dove relatively easy in there. So they have definitely moved across the state. And the main point that I think is worth making here, and I'm just going to reduce that down, I think the main point, in this, and the takeaway is that everything is ebbing and flowing. There is nothing static about our bird populations and their span or their reach, and everything is rare somewhere else, even if it's common for you. And probably the greatest example of this is the house finch. I have had stories from Minnesota birders that have been here for several decades when they talk about a house finch report at someone's feeders in the city being a major event 20 years ago. Now, today we can't even imagine that. Like, literally, I have 7 to 10 of them visit a day here in Lake Elmo at the bird feeders. And I could probably day list them almost every single day of the year, and I hope at some point I will get there, and we'll talk about that trap in the future here in this episode. But house finches, for whatever reason, found kind of critical mass of population and ability to expand, and they have the right conditions that are allowing them to do so. And I don't know if a lot of it is we plant a lot of ornamental trees. We might be providing inadvertently nesting habitat for them. There's a number of factors out there. I'm sure there's been some studies on it. I haven't gotten deep into that myself. But it is something to be aware of, that we have this shift in bird populations. Wild turkey is another one. If you go back and read, say, Eckert's book, Birds of Minnesota, and look in some spaces, he specifically points out that book is about finding rarities in counties. It's not about here's where you find all the common birds in this county. It's about where you find rare or difficult to find birds in certain areas. He references wild turkey throughout that book for a reason, because they used to be really hard to find. Now you can get them everywhere. 6-7 years ago, when I went to the Sac-Zim Bog up in St. Louis County for the first time, I ran into a flock of turkeys crossing a road, and I had a comment made to me by a longtime person up there indicating, yeah, those are becoming common now, but man, it wasn't that long ago. Those were almost impossible, and that's a really good bird for the bog on it. So, just being aware of these, kind of shifts in bird populations over time. And, it's hard sometimes because we get this little slice of time. And if you've just started birding or you haven't really been, paying attention, specifically to these individual common birds or whatever, it's easy to realize or easy to forget or not even realize that these bird populations are in an ebb and flow over time. And now certainly we are experiencing declines across the board in many bird species, but some of them are not declining necessarily. Some of them are actually increasing, or at least they're increasing the diversity of the spaces where they can be found in. And the more you travel around the state, the more you can see this. We're used to things like, say, pileated woodpeckers being everywhere in the state. But in the Southwest, that's not true. That's really hard to get a pileated woodpecker down in Rock County, for example. So anything common can be rare somewhere. It just depends on where you are, what to expect. Red-bellied woodpecker is another great example. The further north you get, the deeper you get into boreal spaces. But as you get up along that northern border around the Rainy River and spaces like that, finding a red-bellied woodpecker is a challenge. In fact, finding a northern cardinal is a challenge that far north. It's happening more and more. And depending on the right spaces, somebody might have them as a yard bird on a daily basis, but they are not widespread in absolutely every square inch of the state. Other than maybe like chickadee, but even chickadee can be a challenge sometimes in the right part of the state. The more prairie that you've got, the less woodlands that you have, you start to eliminate certain species as being out there. So that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about on rare birds this week. Couple of pretty good ones in there, and like I said, just stay safe, do the things you need to do to keep yourself safe and others safe, and happy birding, and hope. All right, I would love to talk about accomplishing larger lists. So this isn't necessarily big day birding. So this isn't about, okay, well, how many bird species can I see in a day, and I'll just drive all over creation to do it. This is about, I'm going to go out bird watching, and while I'm out there, I just want to make sure that I'm doing everything that I can to record all the species that are present. So how do I maximize my list, so to speak? Now, I noted earlier, this was brought up by Lisa Rolfe, and her husband came on a bird walk that I did, guided effort for the MOU, I think it was 2 years ago now. We were at Frontenac State Park, and we put up a really good list of birds. It was a warbler walk, and it was part of my state park big year, so I kind of folded in an MOU effort along with that state park big year, where I visited literally every state park in about 7 months and hiked in all of them. So we kind of had like a 2-part day. We did the upper Frontenac State Park area, and I'm not actually on that on the screen right now on it. And then we went down to Sand Point, which was another excellent location on there. And that just happened to be where I met them in particular. And I think there's always an interest out there, or at least it's something I have detected, is that the newer individuals are to bird watching, or depending on your own experience, you could easily be put in stark contrast with other individuals, depending on how much time they have spent birding, how much time they've spent studying, and I think just personality-wise, how different people approach different situations, and maybe their entire approach to bird watching. So it was a great email that I got from Lisa, and a really great set of questions that came in. And what I wanted to do, I sketched out a bunch of ideas, a bunch of thoughts, and I thought we could go through some of those, maybe get to know them a little bit. And as I have noted before, if you think, okay, well, Ben completely missed the boat on this, or completely skipped over this topic, which is important to getting maximum lists, or whatever it might be in there, pop something in the comments, send me an email on it, whatever it might be. I'll put my email address, well, maybe I won't put it in the description. I'm trying to figure out the best route for that on it. The MOU listserv will have my email on there. That's how a lot of people have hit me so far. I just wonder, putting it out on YouTube might not be a wise idea if there are bots out there, because I'll probably just increase my email traffic by 1,000-fold in it. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was a couple of hard truths, and these really came into focus for me in the last year. Last year, I've mentioned it several times, I did a county big year, or actually a statewide big year that was revolving around maximum list in every one of the 87 counties. So I was doing big days on a regular basis every day, multiple counties, sometimes visiting 6, 8, 9 different counties in one day. And I was going for max species, but I was going all over the place. But while I was doing it, I was birding with other people as much as humanly possible, because a couple of things came into play there that I'll get to. One of the things I learned relatively quickly, though, is that no matter how good you are at whatever it is you're doing, there is always somebody better at it than you. Unless you are the best in the world, there is someone better than you at something, and it could just be small elements. In this case, I have several friends. Liz Harper was a great traveling birding companion and friend last year. She has an amazing ear. And when I say amazing, I mean an order of magnitude better than my own. I'm good. I can hear a lot of birds. I can identify a lot of bird calls. Liz can identify more than me. So the first thing to realize is if you see other people's lists, a lot of people have a really good ear and they know all the calls and they study them. And they're just going to inherently get more birds on a list than you might. So if I took the location on the list right now, Lake Elmo Park, independently birded that at the same time as someone like Liz, I have no doubt in my mind at the end of the day, Liz will probably have a handful more birds than I do. Maybe 3 or 4, depending on the day, whatever it might be, and maybe even as many as 7. Now, certainly there's some unique ones that I might be able to pick out, that Liz didn't happen to come across, but it's one of those hard truths just to realize. But all of that aside, what does your approach look like to maximizing your list? I had a lot of experience with this, and one of the things that I can say is that if you are maximizing your list, it is not a social endeavor. Now, this probably sounds a bit harsh, but the reality of the matter is you will not get a max list if you are talking all day. So depending on who you are birding with, if you're birding solo, this might not be a problem unless you talk loud to yourself, but the reality is birds react to our presence. They react to what we are doing, our approach, our exit, the noise that we make. They do react to that. Now, some birds, song sparrows, for example, will react and make noise, and some of them will just keep on singing. They don't really care. But there are other birds that are skulkers, and sometimes the skulkers will literally just stop making noise. Wood thrush are good like that. Wood thrush do not make a whole lot of noise. If you are really close to them and making noise, they will just shut up and they will disappear. So that's maybe the first bit or first piece is if you have someone with you or multiple someones, being social is great. Talking is great. Talking about birds, whatever it is, and just decompressing. But if you're going for maximum species, you also need to know as a group or individual, when is the time to be quiet? And a lot of that is when you transition habitat, when you are exploring a space and you know there's birds in there, but you're missing them, you might have to be quiet. Now, making noise is a thing in 2 directions. So covering the first side of that, silence. One thing I have noticed is that there are noises going on at all levels of the auditory field available to you. So you could be in, let's just zoom in on this map here. You could be right off of this Nordic Center parking lot in the back. From that location, you should be able to hear a loon making a call over on Lake Elmo itself. You should be able to hear maybe an osprey flying overhead on this lake in here. And then you may hear a number of woodland species in this space here. Now, the only way you're going to hear all of that is if it is a quiet area or a quiet time. If it's early enough in the morning, there shouldn't be too many people, but also while you're not walking. Now, it's not necessarily that you're scaring birds immediately in your vicinity and they're not talking. It's that it is really hard to hear birds that are semi-distant from you if you are also walking at the same time. You know, if you have a spring jacket on and it's like a vinyl material or something and it's swishing, we all know that sound, right? We also get it in the winter time when we've got big puffy winter coats or whatever and they're just rubbing against each other. All that noise, that's just extra decibels of audio that are eliminating sounds at a certain distance away from you. So as you go, it may be that you can hear while walking 50 to 75 feet away from you. Really loud birds, you can maybe still hear 200 feet away from you. When you stop and don't make any noise, you might extend that range to the loudest birds out to a quarter mile. You might extend the quiet birds from, you could have only heard them at 10 feet, now you can hear them at 50, 75 feet. So one thing I always like to point out and note to people is that silence is your friend. Now, noise can be beneficial, but only in the right circumstances. So this first item is pause regularly. You have to walk. That's the whole point, right? Like, is to go out and enjoy Mother Nature, walk around, whatever it might be. This is a great example at Lake Elm. I'm going to go back to the Nordic Center here. And if we go out this back trail, you can see a footbridge right here. So this footbridge, zoom this out a little bit, there you can see the water pathway. So the water comes from the left side of the screen. It goes under the road at Keats Avenue in the park here, comes into this retention pool area. We've got the bridge, and then we've got the main body of water, and then there's a dam and spillway at the east end all the way over here on this, and that eventually dumps into Lake Elmo itself. So why point this out? I point it out because that location is a literal crossroads. I have observed, and what year is it now? We're in 2020, so 9 years I have been bird watching at this location. And in that time, I have come to find a certain number of locations are crossroads. They are collector locations. Whether they be migrants or breeding bird species, whatever you want to call it, this location gets a really interesting density of birds because it is a water location. It has emergent vegetation and cattail reeds. You can see them up in this pool up in the northeast corner of this. You have a large lake just to the east. You have some prairie grassland space to the west. And then you have this large deciduous woodland. And you also have, you can see here, a number of evergreens. Pine trees and various spruce type species. So as we get to this, I have noticed this to be, and specifically this point out here and a couple of dead trees off that point are an excellent location. So one thing that I do on a regular basis is I will walk to this location, I will stop, put down my backpack and everything else, and I'll sit and listen or stand and listen on this footbridge for 10 or 15 minutes almost every time I go. And I do that because things happen there that I do not get anywhere else. This is my best location in the park for green herons. It is the best location in the park to observe pied-billed grebe. It is the first location in my life of going to this park where I found red-headed woodpecker on migration. I had an adult and multiple juveniles. In this area, I also found a fall-summer tanager within about 100 yards of this footbridge. It is a crossroads location. So this is another thing that you can do, another idea. How do you go for max birds? You find your crossroads locations, get to know the area that you're going to, and stop at those crossroads locations, stop making noise of any sort, and listen deeply to everything around you, and be highly observant of where those birds are coming from and to, and find a couple of good dead snags. This point, the closer I get to it, right here on this point, there are a couple of dead trees. You can just see some shadows on them from this satellite view. I have a snag list, I kid you not, that I keep on my phone of just that tree and birds I have seen standing on that tree and using it as a perch. And it's about 30 species deep at this point. And it's from all different times of the year. And all it does is it just reminds me. I keep that list to remind me, because I am a hiker, I'm a mover, that I do need to slow down, I need to stop, and I need to listen to the world around me on a regular basis. So pause and listen. Additionally, you need to get to know the atypical bird calls. The truth of the matter is, in my first 4, 5, 6 years birding, I did not do a very good job of this because I didn't understand how important audio actually was. It wasn't until I birded with another individual, an individual with perfect pitch, Dr. Peter Nichols, that I learned how important it was to know everything you could about a bird species. So, this is a wood thrush. This is up on the Sibley app, and you know this call. That is probably one of the most beautiful bird calls in the entire animal kingdom, and most of us, when we hear it, will know it. However, do you recognize this? If the pit volleys are relatively new to you, it's because they don't give them all the time. There's a certain time span under which they do. I have never seen a wood thrush give those pit volleys, but I have heard those pit volleys before. If I didn't know to associate wood thrush with pit volleys, I would just simply hear it and not know what to do with it. Now, of course, you could, if you have the materials for it, record it, say with your phone, put it up on, say, Facebook, wherever, ask for help. Somebody would help you identify it. You'd get to it. So the point, though, is if you're going for max species, you need to know these odd little calls from some of these birds, and you do have to learn them incrementally over time. Now, it helps if I know that I'm going to be in a deciduous woodland area, and to know what birds are in that location, the time of year, all those different factors and stuff. But this is part of max listing. When I talked to Pete about it, okay, well, how much is audio? Pete made a comment to me that he has birding times when he goes out and 70% of the birds on his list are all audio. He just hears them, records them, moves on. He doesn't use a lot of binocular time, a lot of glass time to reduce eye strain from things. So that really helped me to get an idea of, okay, what am I missing out there? And what I'm missing are these small little odd calls. These come from all kinds of birds. Let's look at one of the most beautiful, scarlet tanager. Scarlet tanager is a challenging call to get to know because it kind of sounds like a robin, but it's a little more husky, a little more burry. So you can hear kind of like a scratchy, husky burriness to it, but it's got a similar cadence to a robin. Robin's a little more run-on in their stuff. But if you get to know this, you'll pick them up. These guys love the top of the canopy, and they love to just disappear. So after leaf out, once these guys come back, it can be a challenge to track them down if you don't recognize that call. So that's stage one. But what about things like this? So that, it's listed as chickbree, but I hear it as chickbur. I didn't know what that was. About 3-4 years ago, Pete Nichols, again, points it out to me, and he's like, here, you can hear scarlet tanager right across this little valley. I think we're at Falls Creek, SNA, up in northeastern Washington County. That was my first opportunity to be like, oh, they do that. Now, here's the other thing. It goes back to the first point. That was across a ravine in the canopy on a semi-breezy day, but it was still audible. When was it not audible? When we were walking. You literally can't hear some of these calls while you're walking. Pausing regularly, listening to the world around you, stop talking, will help you pick up and extend the number of species you can detect. I guess worst case scenario, hear these things, don't know what they are. You maybe don't get them on that list, but now you're primed. You have to, okay, now I need to learn something. Now I know something new that I need to pick up because I don't know what it is. Getting the recording, going back home, using these apps and guides and resources that we've been talking about can help you get there. I had one more. Grosbeak. Rose-breasted. There we go. Rose-breasted grosbeak is another one. It's kind of got a nice run-on, bubbly song or whatever. Kind of sounds like a few different things. Can, get a little easy to mix it up, say, with Baltimore Oriole from time to time and other birds. So we hear this. So bubbly, musical, kind of extends on. But what about this? That alone, just that ching, ching, that little scratchy call after full leaf out, after these birds have begun nesting, when you get later into the season, you'll get this on a semi-regular basis in woodlands. And I've seen really good birders that I've birded with completely glaze over it like it doesn't even exist, or like it can't be identified, like you can't narrow it down to that exact bird, but you can. That call or call note is unique to the rose-breasted grosbeak, at least in this area. I don't know much about, say, black-headed grosbeak and whether or not, if there were one present, if it does similar calls or whatever. I'm not going to go into that too much. But by and large, you can be reasonably sure that if you can match that call note up without seeing the bird, that it is a rose-breasted grosbeak. That is part of Mac's listing. It is understanding the calls beyond just the songs of birds, because once we go to full leaf out, once you get females on nests, you get a lot less territorial singing. And as you get in towards hatching, a lot of these are just kind of, say, contact calls or conversational calls from bird species. And they're things that you can detect out there when you're pausing, you're listening, catching these. A lot of times I'll get these from grosbeak lower to the ground when they're maybe foraging for seed or whatever, and you'll just hear these coming from a thicket or something like that, and be able to pick that bird out without having to either bump it or, waiting for it to call or show itself in there. And some of these are real true skulkers. When we talk about wood thrush, man, sometimes those can be really hard to track down and find. And if you're not getting them on a full singing day, it can be a real challenge to pick them up. Let's see. So I'm going to move back. I had a map open. Yep. I'll just zoom this back out. Another thing about Mac's listing, it's the idea of being mentally present. And so what does that mean? Considering the times that we're in, this is probably a good point. Unfortunately, when we go bird watching, we bring everything with us. And I mean baggage, mental baggage. Everything that's going on in our life comes with us sometimes, and we think about it. We mull it over, we go for a walk, and we help, maybe we work that over in our mind and, something that's stressing us or whatever. All of that removes our ability to identify everything that's in front of us because we are not fully mentally present in the moment. I wrote about this last year in the Minnesota Birding newsletter in one of the pieces I was talking about, that depending on what your situation is, I had actually talked, a good friend of mine, Josh Wallestad, him and I got together and went after yellow rails up in Aitkin County last year, and he had just finished up teaching for the year, high school teacher, and it was a tough year for him. He told me flat out it was a challenging year, and I didn't have that kind of year. In fact, I had just been spending the whole year bird watching and doing my job, and my job's not exceedingly stressful. I certainly don't have to teach children, and prepare them for the world or anything. So that day while we were birding, I was picking up things that he would, oh, okay, yeah, now I hear that, or I don't really hear that at all. Later in the year, I stayed at his place. Him and his wife invited me in to stay, and we birded Kandiyohi County the entire day. So this is after most of the summer has passed, or a good percentage of it has passed. And Josh was a completely different birder. He had the summer off. He was doing family things, family events and stuff, was relaxed, was present. Like, he was primed to bird watch the entire day, and the results were very different. I was able to observe in Josh a very different birder at different times of the year based on what his level of personal stress was, where he was mentally, was he present, was he not present. So it's really important to remember, take a deep breath, and when you're bird watching, be bird watching. And it's easier than it's a little bit easier than if you leave that other stuff on the side and you can just be bird watching, to pick up everything, to really listen deeply to everything around you. It is so easy to tune out individual species that you hear all the time until, like somebody might point it out to you and be like, oh yeah, there's a crow in the background or whatever. And you're like, oh yeah, I totally heard it. I didn't acknowledge it. So I've had days where things didn't get on the list. So I was like, oh yeah, I did hear that. I didn't put that on the list. Oops. So just another idea, it's a little more ethereal concept, a little harder to pin down on it. Going back into max list, max items, I think Lake Elmo Park, Regional Park here, is a good example of this. The more diverse the habitat, the better your chances of having a maximum species list. So when I go to Lake Elmo Park, I could go out there and I could hike in one specific area. So you could come out here and you could hike in a circuit that just covers this woodland that you can see on screen here, and maybe the adjacent lake, and maybe a little bit of this open space. But what they would miss is a lot of different habitat and a lot of different space. And now not all of these lake and retention pond areas are the same. This space over here, generally speaking, is way too shallow and does not have the food supply for common loon. The big lake to the east does, and Eagle Point Lake, depending on the year and water levels, can also host common loon. This gets into yet another point about knowledge of a location. I get max species, I believe, or near max species at a location, usually because I know the location intimately well and I know what to expect and when to expect it. So I know that when I come down this road, that if I take a left turn up here to the group camp area right here, I know that this driving loop in the fall is one of the best sparrow locations in the county. In fact, I call it Sparrow Corner. I can pick up a number of white-crowned and Harris's sparrows here every single year. So if you do an eBird search, go to a hotspot search or whatever, but you do a specific, or maybe even do a species search, zoom in on this area, you will see reports from me year over year of white-crowned sparrows. In fact, I had a very high count there last year. I think it was like 15 white-crowned sparrows set up shop there for 2, 3, 4 days or whatever. So getting to know individual hot locations within a park can make a big difference, and that is accumulated knowledge. That is hundreds and hundreds of trips to this park, getting to know the intimate details of it and where to expect certain bird species. So that's, where do I expect great horned owl? Well, I expect great horned owl in this grove of trees down here southwest of the first parking lot. So when I go into that first parking lot, I might go off trail and I might walk through this grove because I know that's a good great horned owl spot. Where's my best warbler spot? It's at the crossroads. So in here, this stretch across the footbridge and back, that is the best spot for warblers in the spring, depending on the wind and what have you. So all different locations within the park have a different propensity for various species types. So getting to know that and being willing to say, okay, I'm coming out here to do a walk, and maybe I'm going to do 3 miles. Don't spend all 3 miles in one spot. If you can, go to a location, take a half-mile walk or hike around something, maybe come out here and do this woodland loop. Get back in your car or just come back across the road and do some kind of a loop out here on the red and blue trails at Eagle Point Lake and visit the dock right here, walk up this, and there's a duck blind right here, and then finish this loop out, and then eventually come back to the main road and come back in. And then maybe you end up at the group camp, and then maybe you end up in the horse trailer parking. That's where the house finches are located inside the park. Bluebirds are pretty easy to get up and over here. Eastern meadowlarks are a little bit easier up here. So there's all kinds of different things going on in these spaces, and getting to know those, knowing what time of year it is, what birds to expect, having all that intimate knowledge starts to pay dividends. Now, I consider myself still fairly young. I'm in my early 40s. I've been an athlete my entire life. So when I go out, I have the tendency to put 6, 7, 8 miles on, and I'll bird for 4 to 5, maybe even 6 hours in one location. So I might just stay out of the car and hike multiple trails out here. So that's another thing to be cognizant of, is sometimes these maximum lists, these largest lists, are predicated upon, time. How much time can you put into it? And that's, bulk birding has been kind of my signature for quite some time. And that's how I ended up learning a lot of these things, because I just put more field time in than the average person. So, if somebody in a normal week that likes to birdwatch puts in like 10 hours of birding in a week, I'm not kidding. In spring and summer, I have the tendency to put more 30 to 40 hours in. So it's like a second job for the amount of time put into it. That's not a humble brag or anything like that. That's just the reality of the amount of time you put into it. You start to get to know things. So we talked about a couple of those items. Mentally present. So one of the things that Lisa had written or made a comment about was along the lines of, when things get challenging or depending on the habitat that you're in, what's your scanning methodology for stuff? So the first, we've talked about it, is always be listening. And it's really tough to multi-thread because you can only actually do one thing at a time. You can't actually do multiple things at a time. Sometimes when I pause and listen, I will literally close my eyes. Because otherwise, I'm a little bit like the dog in Up. I could just see squirrel and then I'm on it and I completely forget about everything else. And I can phase myself so much that I'll say, I'm looking for the following bird right now, trying to listen hard for that species, and I can completely ignore every sound around me, and I can completely miss birds that are calling and singing. So, that's one of those initial approaches and elements. But if you talk about, let's say you want to look for waterfowl. So let's go out to Eagle Point Lake here. We're going to go along this trail and we're going to get to this duck blind out here. So this is relatively open. There's cattails here. In the middle of summer, you can't see over them. They'll be like 7 feet tall. Not even I can see over top of these cattails, but you can still see out the front of the blind. But when you're coming down the hill to this point, you have a pretty broad view, and you can get to a hilltop just over where these trees are here, and you can see out into this lake. So, something to note, when you're looking for waterfowl and you think you've covered the area, do it again. And when you're done with that, do it one more time to be sure. Because although you've probably seen most of the dabblers that are out in the open water, you have not seen all of the divers. Some waterfowl like bufflehead or scoters at the right time of the year, these are deep water divers, and they can stay under a long time, or if they don't stay under a long time, they do not stay up for a very long time. So it is incredibly possible that you have just straight up missed birds because you are not scanning and rescanning the same area multiple times. So that's, part of this is, how long do I keep doing the same thing? Birding is a little different than other stuff. If you just like walk up to a lake and just glance across it without any glass, no binoculars, no scope, no nothing, you glance across and you're like, well, it looks like an open water of nothingness. I guarantee you there is still something out there because it is just hiding in plain sight, and it could be because it is diving. Additionally, if you're out at this duck blind, and again, we are right, let me put a point on here. There we go. All right, so we lose a little bit of our screen on that, but I'm at this point right here. Now, there's not a lot of people on the other side, the west side of that shoreline. There is a trail over there, but there is a bit of a buffer zone. Things that I have noticed is that in the trees along here, the cormorants love to dry or sun themselves on those trees over there. So things that you should be doing when you are looking for waterfowl is also scanning the opposite shorelines that are visible to you and the trees that are there looking for birds. You might find a black-crowned night heron hanging out in a tree. You might find a belted kingfisher that hasn't moved from its perch in several minutes. So scan those good quality perch locations, those snags that I talked about a moment ago. Scan them really well. Scan them slowly. Use a scope if you can. Binoculars if that's what you've got. Now, additionally, many of the locations that you go to are high traffic locations. The lowest traffic location around a lake is where the birds are going to go, which means the old parable of, yep, I'm at this location and everything's as far away as possible. Well, it's that way because somebody was there before you, probably 5 minutes before you, and they scared all the birds across the lake. So the early bird gets the worm. If you want to see all the birds relatively close, you have to approach slowly, and you better get there really early. If that is not an option, then approach slowly, and look across the entire lake. Now, dabblers are really good at hiding in emergent vegetation. So if we go straight across this lake and look at this shoreline over here, we have about 15 or 20 feet in locations of cattails. You can see just kind of this scraggly layer along the edge of the lake, and that is all emergent vegetation. That's all swimmable in between stalks depending on the time of year. This is where the wood ducks, hooded mergansers, the mallards, any related dabbling species, this is where they're hanging out. American coot, depending on how shallow the related zone is, this is where the sora are hanging out. If they're not making noise, this is where the Virginia rail are hanging out. Though you probably need a little bit more cattail and related territory. But if we go back down here, this zone in here at Lake Elmo has been year over year for about 3 years straight now, has been the least bittern spot. So between least bitterns, marsh wrens, and the like, and this area over here really good as well. I've also gotten least bittern and American bittern up in these locations. This is your listen zone, but it is also your scanning zone. So when I go out and I'm trying to maximize my list, I go out to the lake out here because I'm looking for waterfowl, especially during spring migration. And I'm checking the entire open water of the lake, checking it twice, checking it a third time, and then I scan the shoreline on the opposite shores away from me. And I scan it slowly. I'm looking for the wood ducks. Okay, I finally got some wood ducks. I'm going to keep scanning. Did I get an American coot? I know they nest there. Where are the trumpeter swans hanging out? If they're not making noise, there are 2 nesting trumpeter swans on this lake year over year, about 4 or 5 years in a row. And you wouldn't think one of the largest body mass birds in North America could hide, but they can do a really good job of it because when the cattails are really out and really thick, they can just disappear from view. And I almost always find them at the edges going after emergent vegetation. So these dabbling species, that's how you track the extra ones down. That's how you find out if there's blue-winged teal, one of the small ducks, green-winged teal. Things like that, you've got to scan the edges of these cattail areas. Now, that's probably also a good quality strategy for some other species. Nearby you, when you look at a space like this, on either side of this is where the marsh wrens are located. This is where the swamp sparrows are. If they're not singing on that day, they are still in there. They are still moving around. Getting to know how to pish for a bird, so making your own noise to bring them in. So you're being quiet, you're doing your thing, but if some birds aren't making themselves known, there is that opportunity. You can look it up, you can find some videos on it. Every single person I have ever talked to about pishing for birds does it differently. I have heard people really quiet that kind of just go like this. And I have heard some people give the loudest pish I have ever heard in my life. Andy Nias is my favorite. I talk to him like, holy man, you can really pish loud. And his response was, yep, I learned that from Mike Hendrickson. He said something to the effect of, the louder the better in it. And so that might be something more like, and it may be continuous. Then additionally, when I was birding with Sparky Stensis last year up in Carlton County, Sparky's a longtime birder, extremely well educated, knows his stuff. He makes, in addition to that pishing noise, kind of like a kissing noise off his hands. So a little more like, so this additional, kind of noise that maybe is mimicking some kind of a squirrel noise that's irritated, or maybe a weasel of some sort. This odd noise that's bringing birds in, because if they don't know that you're there, if you've been quiet, if you've been successful in being quiet up to a certain point, the birds that are hiding may just be resting. They may be foraging, whatever it might be. But if you surprise them a little bit, you can pop somebody out. Now, additionally, this is another thing I learned. I did not know it was a thing. I learned about it last year. Clinton Dexter Nienhaus. I've birded with him a few times, and something I learned from him last year was to clap. So if you are at a wetland like this, so you've got a lot of cattails and stuff around and you're not hearing Virginia rail or you're not hearing specifically Sora, you can clap just as loud as you can. Just do a couple of claps. If you startle a Sora or a rail in particular, they will respond. Sora are one of the best for it. So there are some species that respond to you, some that do not. There are times when it's not necessarily appropriate, and then there's times where it's a reasonable measure to be like, hey, is there one of these present? I'd like to know, whatever it might be. It's another thing to have, kind of tricks in your bag or things in your bag of how you scan an area, whether or not you make some noise, whether or not you are completely silent during that time and that process on it. So that's some of those ideas in that space. Now, it was brought up, and I'll talk about it, when you're talking about trying to max out birds and you're in a woodland, we talked about calls. Calls are super important. I don't have a whole lot to offer when it is like, how do I get more visuals when the birds aren't making a bunch of noise and moving around? In a fully leafed out canopy in a deciduous forest, I have no answer to that. More time certainly helps because sooner or later a bird is either going to make a noise or move, but it is not easy. If you get to know things like the little bit of a rat-a-tat-tat that you can get from sapsuckers, you can pick that up. If I just pop them up on here. Red-breasted, yellow belly, that's what I want. Wrong species. Let's see if we can hear a drum. So the almost Morse code-like tapping, that's a sapsucker thing. That is not, you don't get that from downy, hairy, red belly, pileated, or whatever. That tapping cadence is something you get from sapsucker. So in these deciduous woodlands, in these spaces, at the right time of year when everything is leafed out, it is not easy. Pishing will help. It will bring in migrant warblers, certainly. You can do that. You have to be aware of these kind of open sight lines and spaces, find opportunities for birds moving, making chip notes, track those chip notes down. Something you can do is, as the warblers are really crushing through, if you're having a hard time tracking down some warblers, listen for the chickadees. I have noticed personally that when I find a lot of chickadee activity, and they are boisterous, they are always kind of chipping around and making noise, and they're pretty easy to pick out, but I have noticed that chickadees have the tendency to fall in with warblers when they're in their area. So everybody's finding bugs and finding good stuff, and the warblers are active. You might be able to track that group down by hearing chickadees making noises just up ahead. Track that down and watch them. So you might think, oh, well, it's just more chickadees. I'm actually looking for something else. Hang out with the chickadees for a bit. They can actually teach you something and help you get there. The same happens with sparrow families as well. If you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 different song sparrows in an area and it's still migration, hang out with them. Because they might actually have swamp sparrows with them, or they might have some other sparrows. Savannas might fall in with them if you're near the edge of a woodland with some open space. Anything is possible in that. And that's the other, maybe element of this is I never assume that when I see a number of one species, that's what that is. So a good example is if you scare up some general blackbird species from a muddy area along the edge of a lake or something like that. If you scare them up, and let's see, what's a good example of this? This over here. Little copse of trees here, and there's a little cement structure here. Sometimes I'll stand on this cement structure when I'm scanning and listening. But what I've had happen in the past before is this set of cattails and wetland to the east of it that dumps into Lake Elmo. I've seen flocks of blackbirds come in here. Blackbirds mix in flocks, and we a lot of times will get a whole host of them, including rusty blackbirds, and then less occasionally brewer's blackbird mixing in with them. This is your opportunity when you say, okay, well, there's like 20 some red-winged blackbirds, there's definitely some grackles in there. This is your opportunity. Pick through that group, listen closely, understand the rusty blackbird call. Kind of sounds like a tape recorder being rewound and played quickly. Get to know those call sequences and stuff to see if you can peel them out of that kind of audio tapestry, that audio landscape in there. But when you get a species group like that, pick through it. Be meticulous. That's the other element, is be meticulous with groups of birds. That paid off for me out here. If I go out to this space here, I was parked in this lot to the north edge of this screen, not in the horse lot, but I was walking the area right in front of this horse lot along the road, because when I drove up there, I saw a large flock of sparrows in the spring retreat from the edge back to the needle-bearing trees, the conifers and stuff in here. Went and parked, came right back to it. The birds had dropped right back to the road shoulder, and I was picking through all of it, and it was almost all song sparrows, but there were a few other migrants in there, and that's how I got my first park, and my only park, lark sparrow, was mixed in with these other birds. It had kind of, I wouldn't say gotten lost, but it just fell in with other sparrows and was relatively easy to pick out at that point. And that's, when you have a whole bunch of like this homogeneous group of sparrows, you can pick out the big one in the group. The big one is usually the Harris's sparrow, which is just absolutely beast compared to them. White-crowned sparrow. You get a lot of that element in there when you're going for it. So there's certainly a lot of other topics that I could cover in this, and it's already drug on quite long. I wanted to go through all the things I had in the front of my head. As I think of more, I'll try and come back to this subject. But if you have questions, if you have ideas and say, hey, well, I do this thing too, and it helps me get more birds, please share it out in the comments here. Send it to me. We'll talk about it in future episodes and kind of help individuals to figure out, how do I expand my lists in these areas when I go out birding, so I just find more birds in it. So thanks a lot. We'll move on to the next. All right, we are back for the final segment of episode 4, and it's a little tongue-in-cheek when I say this is a warning. The reason why this is a warning is because that this could open up Pandora's box in a good way or a bad way, depending on your personality type. If you are a competitive individual, if you love listing, and you haven't discovered day listing, if you consider yourself an at-risk birder, you might want to think about not listening to this segment. This stems out of a request from Timothy Walker to start looking a little bit deeper at the MOU website. And I can honestly tell you that this plague was unleashed upon me by Pete Nichols, a good friend of mine. And when we kind of made each other aware of certain things, and then we realized there were day listers out there, not just county listers. I wasn't even a county lister, to be completely honest with you. And I'm not sure if I consider myself a county lister now. But once I became aware of day listing, it can really send you down an interesting path. It's been a lot of fun, but at the same time, it's time consuming, and it can definitely become a lifetime passion. So if you're not looking for a new thing to do, this section might not be for you. But if you're curious, if you want to be able to dig into the MOU website a little bit deeper, that's what we're going to do, is we're going to dig a bit deeper into it. This might be a little bit out of order for the MOU website, and I promise I do have some discussion that will be coming up in future episodes that'll start at the beginning, getting your account set up in the MOU, and then using data in that space, using the website to its fullest, and then actually synchronizing your data between both the MOU and eBird. It's definitely something that, as I was an eBirder from the start and not an MOU user from the start, was really great to see that Dave Callender has put in some feature sets that allow you to sync that data between the two and use an active account on both sides and not really have to worry about the details of it. So again, a little tongue-in-cheek, just kind of having a bit of fun with the subject. So, day listing, remember, I warned you. So, day listing. I feel like this is an opportunity for one of those pamphlets. So you've decided to ruin your life. Again, I'm just having fun. I do this and I think it's humorous. I know some individuals that are dedicated day listers. They truly deeply enjoy bird watching, and this is just a motivator for them. It keeps them getting out on a regular basis, staying healthy, doing good things. So it's all tongue-in-cheek. In eBird, you can actually see the beginnings of this. It's just not fully developed or fleshed out. But if we go into, at the bottom left of the screen here, target species, and we go to April, and then we say Minnesota. Now, you can ping this in the for your, so for your Minnesota list, you can say life list. So that's saying, show me the species I need in Minnesota that I do not have. So I could just click this button, and it would show me that I've never seen a lesser blackback gull in the state of Minnesota. And some people right now are like, what? You've never seen a lesser blackback? Nope. No need to bird shame me. I have 320 species in Minnesota. I have over 100 in all 87 counties, and I'm comfortable in the fact that I have not seen a lesser blackback gull yet, because I'm sure that the majority of people have not. But then you can do a year list. So let's do year list with April. So we can see that I have not yet seen a chipping sparrow. I don't know what's up with that. I don't know where they're at. I just haven't seen or heard one, but they're semi-ubiquitous, so I will eventually. I'm not really worried about it. So what about if we keep going down this list? Month list. All years. So for my April lifetime list, so if you were a month lister, this is a thing you could do. And now again, I'm on the eBird website. We're going to go into the kind of OG of listing, and that's the MOU, because that's really some of the roots of this space. But I'm going to talk about it in eBird first. Black-billed magpie. Northern bird, northwestern part of the state. You can find them all over the place up there. I just happen to have not really been up there in April, so I don't have a black-billed magpie in April. Now, this is where the slippery slope begins. If you're an at-risk birder, this is your last chance to turn back. April 18th all year. So this is literally every April 18th that I have ever had in my birding past. So 8-9 years worth of April 18ths aggregate. What do I not have on it? I don't know if this updated or not. No, it did not. So in the day list, this shows me, according to eBird, that I have seen 103 species on April 18th all time. Wild turkey is not one of them. So this would tell me if that I was going out birding and wanted to maximize my day list, that I should focus on wild turkey, purple finch, a little more of a northern bird. You could still get some migrants coming through the metro, so I'd maybe need to go north for that. Cooper's hawk, you can just kind of randomly come across one. You might know a nest location, just depends. Obviously, I haven't been up north, so no common raven. Barn swallows are still a bit of a challenge. They're just starting to come in on that, tailing edge of tree swallows, or the bulk of the tree swallows. Then you start to get some barn swallows coming through. Don't have a greater scaup, redpoll, sharp-shinned hawks. So a couple of those accipiters I don't have yet as an April 18th bird on it. So again, this could just be a motivating factor. It could be like, well, what am I going to do today? I have a broad experience. I've personally seen over 300 species in Minnesota lifetime. Some people, are up at 400 or whatever, so be it. But in my own personal journey, what am I interested in? And if I'm interested in maximizing day-to-day bird listing, this might be a thing. So let's go to the MOU. All right, so in the MOU, there's some really cool stuff in here. I'm already logged into this, and again, we will go through the MOU website in greater depth in the future. But for the time being, I want to click on checklists. So what is it, about 3, 4, 5, 6 items down on the left-hand side, checklists. And I want to open up personal month checklists. So I'll let this finish up. So at first, this just looks like a giant grid of numbers. But what it actually is showing is your month and day listing stuff. So the microcosm view that eBird was giving to us, we get this composite everything view on the MOU. And this is where Dave Calendar's done some amazing work on stuff, is presenting this to you all linkable and ready to go. Zoom in a bit tighter. Every day of the year is in this grid below. So when we look in this, it is April 18th as I'm recording this. We go across this line in April and we will see 103. So my eBird and MOU numbers agree. I'm going to zoom in. There's my 103 right in the center of the screen. I could even click on this, and this is a checklist of all 103 species that I have seen. This is another thing that I think the MOU does a superior job on compared to the eBird, is that Dave's got this program so that when you click that thing, it does a red check or red box fill for all the birds that you have on it. Now you have a printable list. I have seen people that print these lists out, so they take them in the field with them. They can just flip the page to April 18th and say, I'm going birding today. What do I not have that I think I can get? Awesome, awesome resource. It's also a dangerous resource because now you have 366, 65 potential lists that you're keeping track of. And now the MOU keeps track of it for you. You just have to put your data in here. If you put your data in eBird, you can get that data over to here. We will talk about that in the future. I just want to cover this first subject just to kind of whet the appetite a little bit. Up above, you can see month species list. There's a composite indicating how many statewide people have seen in history. So it gives you an idea. If you look at like January, the January composite's 210. That's a lot of species. That's saying there's 210 species ever found in the state in January. I myself have seen 112. I think that's a pretty good number. I don't think that's anything to sneeze at in there. So there's a couple of different versions of these lists and your annual species count lists and stuff in here. But something additional that's really nice is the missing day list. It's a little bit slow to load, but if we zoom in down at the bottom down here, it's missing day list. It even says it's slow, but let's click on it. It's not super slow. And let's get this open. What we're going to see when this list comes around is we're going to see a table of every species in a reverse sort for the number of days that you've seen that species. So starting at the top up here, because I don't have any birds 366, I don't have any of them on every single day of the year. I just have, what I have in here. So we've got American crow 361. This list, this table then shows me the exact day. So instead of the eBird style of I can ask about today, you can literally just show your entire year right here. And it's really helpful. And that's how I knew when I referenced earlier in the video, I think I referenced the Eastern meadowlark, that I didn't have it on on Easter. Because if I do a search in here for meadowlark, I should have few matches. So we got January, February, March, April. April is the 12th. So April 12th, I do not have meadowlark. That was the one day in the month that I needed it lifetime. I have 150 day sightings of Eastern meadowlark. Let's pop this off of here. And you can begin to see, it gives you an idea of when the available span for a bird is, or where you've gotten to or haven't gotten to. Anything that shows up as a dash, so January, February for Eastern meadowlark, I do not have Eastern meadowlark because, as I noted, they're migratory. So you won't have any records in there. Additionally, then, if you see a span of time, so actually I'll just go right back to here, Eastern meadowlark, January, February, March. March 1 through 11, I do not have that bird. So I got one on the 12th, another one on the 14th and 15th, and one on the 18th. So I'm just reading between the numbers here because the numbers that are present are ones I do not have. And that's just important to note that this is the list telling you how many you've seen over on the left-hand edge, and then which days during the year and each month that you have not seen that species. That, in a nutshell, is day listing. If this does nothing for you, then it is literally nothing to worry about. And this was just kind of the slippery slope that I was talking about, is if this appeals to, if you're like, oh, this is cool, just be warned. This can really put you down a rabbit hole. It can be a lot of fun, but it can be very time consuming as well. So it can really just suck you right in on it. I find it quite enjoyable to really start blanking out months. Now, some people, they can take it to the nth degree, eliminate birds from this list and be like, I've seen an American crow on every day of the year. And I've got friends that have seen multiple species, many species on every single day of the year. That's a great level of dedication, a lot of fun, pretty cool. I love blanking months, honestly. Crow is gone in March, April, May, July, January, September, October, November. So I'm, getting close to that 366. But it's fun to, think about, wait a minute, mallard in March? I don't have one on the 13th. All right, I'm going to make a point of that, because it should be pretty easy to do. And, it just gives you a little something to do if you're like, it's March, there's not a lot going on in migration. What am I going to do today? Happens to be the 13th. There's something to focus on. Oh, and I don't have goldfinch on March 13th either. So you can just kind of chain some things together. eBird gives you a really good lookout and just consolidates this better for you. But this is a great view in general to give you a look for it. This can also help you with stuff where you're trying to get a species every month of the year. Getting a 12-pack of them is one of the lister parlances for it. So belted kingfisher, I have at least one in every month of the year. They overwinter pretty well in spaces where you have open water near power plant outflows and whatever else. You can find belted kingfisher. So though I only have 165, total different days spotting them, I have been able to find them every month of the year. And you can see, because there are no dashes, just dashed out months, I've got that one across the board. But then you can start to look at other species and say, okay, do I have that bird in all months of the year on there? Like great blue heron, here's a good example, and pied-bill grebe. I've gotten some overwintering pied-bill grebe, but I do not have February. So that's the last month where I don't have it. Great blue heron, I don't have February and December. Should be able to get December. Great blue heron's a tough one. Sometimes you can get them overwintering in some spaces around the metro, but it's a challenge. You actually have to make an effort for it, and that'd be a fun wintertime effort. If you're like, well, it's February, I'm going to track down that great blue heron. So I'm going to go to, say, Kaposia Landing multiple times and see if I can track one down, because you got Pig's Eye Lake and the outflow from the power plant down there. Keeps the water open. That, I think, is where I got my January one on the 2nd several years ago. So that's an opportunity to maybe have an overwintering great blue heron. But the vast majority leave. It's just, it's a matter of time. So you can see that for all of these species in here, just a really cool, fun resource to use. If I back this up, we go back to this chart. I find a lot of fun with numbers, a lot of joy in just kind of digging into the details. It's fun to look at the May line in this and see where I max out on species and the ebb and flow, and see that I start the month at 96 species. But at the end of April, it's in the hundreds. So you've got this kind of chain of triple digit numbers that then peaks right around the 16th, 17th. So from the 15th at 100 and, well, actually all the way back. So yeah, there's a whole warbler block of birds, the neotropical migrants, that really kind of make up these lists and stuff. But by the time you get to the end of May, it really starts to filter down and peter back out. It drops down into the low 100s and even the double digits as opposed to triple digits on it. And then you can see kind of the ebb and flow of everything. It gives you an average day. So that's another fun one as well on it, is just being able to work on your average day. So the average day in May for me is 140, and I'm sure others are well above that. But it's just a fun thing to do, if you're trying to figure out, well, it's February, it's cold, I don't know, what should I do? Well, maybe you work on those day lists and try and move that average up. It's my worst average at 26. It'd be fun to move that up to 30. Same thing for December. December has all the holidays in it. I have the tendency to bird a lot less in there myself. So it might be fun and say, well, I should get a visit to the north, maybe early in December. On the 4th, I only have 11 species in it or something. So that's all I'm going to cover for today on the MOU website. Literally could do a segment of this every single video probably for a year, and I wouldn't get to the end of it. So there's a lot of good stuff in here. Promise we'll go back to maybe the beginnings of it and cover some entry-level stuff in there. But I did want to talk about listing just because, I don't know, what else are we going to do? We're all stuck in our homes. We're stuck near our homes. So may as well pick up another good bad habit, such as it is, and find some day listing. So thanks everyone for joining. I think that's it for this week's episode. Stay safe and happy birding.